Hey guys, I just about started this video without hitting record. I was like about to speak and then I was like, wait a second. So glad I called myself out on that because I would have done this whole video to nobody. Today I am doing my November wrap up, so I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read throughout the month of November. As usual, I'm going to be talking about my least favourite books first and working my way up to my most favourite books. The least favourite book that I read this month was one that I rated 2 stars, and it was Unexplained New Zealand by Julie Miller and Grant Osborne. This is one that I did, I read it while I was doing a reading vlog, so if you want to see that I will link it down below. It was a lot of fun because this book, some naughty library patron had written their own annotations in this book, which made it super interesting to read, but the book in itself wasn't awesome. It was just kind of like vaguely interesting. It's basically about unexplained events that have happened in New Zealand, so things like ghost sightings, UFO sightings, and legendary animals and such that don't actually exist but people have sighted. So like people, for example, have sighted a big black panther in the South Island, but we don't have panthers in New Zealand, so things like that. The reason this book didn't like blow me away or anything, as much as I am interested in all of those subjects, a lot of these things were just like urban legends that I'd heard before, so there wasn't very much new in it. Some parts were interesting. Also, I think the book could have used a little bit of editing because there were a couple places where like dates were wrong, like they would be talking about 1892 and then the next sentence they would say 1992 when they meant the same one. So little things like that really bug me in books. Worth reading if you're interested in the subject, but it wasn't like the best book. I had a couple of 3-star reads this month as well. The first one was super interesting actually, but it's Behind Bars by Annalise. Anna was a journalist in New Zealand, so she's covered a lot of crime stories and things like that, and she wrote this book based on interviews with people who have been in prison, their families, and guards who have worked in prisons as well. So there are kind of different chapters on different subjects like weapons in prisons, what it's like to be away from family while you're in prison, everything you can possibly imagine. It was darker than I expected, although I really should have expected that. There are some pretty like gruesome stories about prison violence and things like that, and she also went in parts a little bit into the reasons why different people that she'd spoken to were in prison, so like the things they had done, which some of it was really horrible, as you can imagine. As much as it was really interesting, I think unfortunately it wasn't the best written book. I don't know whether it's because Anna is used to writing like short journalism pieces, but as a book it didn't really fit together as cohesively as I would have liked it to. Sometimes in like between paragraphs there would be information you'd be given in one paragraph, like about so-and-so who is the blah 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 of this place called blah blah or whatever. In the next paragraph it would give you the exact same spiel about that person again, which you don't need because you've just been told who that person is, so you don't need their title and where they're from and everything in the next paragraph as well. So I think it's somewhat of an editing issue, but also perhaps Anna was writing all of these pieces as like individual like little articles because maybe that's what she's used to. I'm just presuming things, but that was kind of how it read. It read like you weren't supposed to read the book from start to finish, even though it was laid out like you were. Like this paragraphs just didn't fit together in my opinion at times. Sometimes it was fine, but at times that happened. The way things were written, there was one thing I tweeted like a picture of one of the pages because it was something like talking about one of the men who was responsible for a certain prison break. So like a couple guys escaped from prison. There's a whole chapter on prison escapes and it's so interesting to hear about the people that have broken out of prison. It's crazy. But one of them, they were saying that the guy responsible for it, which was a prison break that happened in like 1960 or something, he was in prison for the 1992 murder of this person and the 2003 murder of this other person. And I was like, so he's in prison in 1960 for things he did in the 90s and the 2000s. And what she meant was that like he did this prison break, he was in prison back then, and then later he went on, once he got out of prison for whatever he was in it for, he went on to like commit a couple murders later in his life. But the way she worded it was like that was the reason why he was in prison, and just things like that really bother me as a reader as well, because I'm like, editing. As interesting as this book was, like the content was really interesting, I just don't think it was very well written. The other 3-star book that I read this month is one that I actually still have. I have to return it to the library tomorrow, but it was The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. This is a self-help type of book, but it's also kind of just a memoir of Gretchen's life for a year, because she went through an entire year doing a happiness project. So each month she gave herself like a theme that she wanted to work on. So like for example, January was energy, and then February was her relationship with her husband, and then the next month was something else, and she just did a different theme every month. And then when she got to December, she was working on like all of them. My favorite month was January, which was energy, just because it's all those like new year, fresh start kind of things. So for example, she had a bit about cleaning out her wardrobe and cleaning out her house and everything, like decluttering pretty much, and I love doing that. And it was actually, I read this during a week where my exams were over and I really needed to do like a spring cleaning of everything, so it really inspired me to do that, which was perfect timing. There was also quite a bit of wisdom about children, because she at the time of writing this had 2 young children. I don't have children, so I don't know if these tips work, but they seemed pretty legit. A lot of the sections were a bit dull and just not particularly relevant to my life, but that's to be expected. Like only certain sections are going to apply to certain people, and her idea of this whole thing is to make your own happiness project and like pick your own themes that apply to you and things you personally need to work on, so that's fine. Like I said though, it is also kind of her personal memoir, and I just kind of hate that when you don't know the author. Memoirs just aren't interesting. Like I don't really want to know about all your like dramas with your husband, and Gretchen just comes across like a really unlikable sort of person, unfortunately. Like I think if I met her in real life I wouldn't like her, so that kind of put me off this book as well. But other than that, it had some good parts to it. Then moving on, I finally had 2 5-star reads this month, which was awesome. One of them I did a review on, which I will link in the information bar below, but it was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. I really need to look up how to say his last name. I keep saying Capote or Capote, I don't know. But anyway, this book is a non-fiction story about a family called the Clutters who were murdered in their home in Kansas, and it follows just the people who did it and why they did it and trying to piece together the case pretty much. And it reads like a novel, so if you're wanting to get into non-fiction but fiction is your thing, you just like reading novels, I think this is one that you really might enjoy. It's pretty dark obviously given the subject matter, but it was very, very interesting and very well written, so if you want to know more about that, I will link my review in the comments down below. The final 5-star book that I read this month was Much Ado About Shakespeare by Donovan Bixley, I think. I want to say like Blitzen because, you know, Christmas. But this is a book by a New Zealand author slash artist, which I think is awesome. And this book was amazing. I kind of wish I still had it to show it to you, but if you guys want to see some images from the inside of this book, you can go watch my TBR for November, because some of the illustrations in this are amazing. It's basically a illustrated biography of Shakespeare's life, and it takes a bit of a different angle of Shakespeare's life. It kind of tries to give you the interesting, like not so well known facts about him. Obviously the illustrations are beautiful, and that was probably my favorite thing about it. It's just nice to see such beautiful illustrations, and I love that it was like quirky and just made Shakespeare seem like a human being. Like it gave you those human facts that made Shakespeare relatable. There were also a lot of interesting additions in this book as well. There was like a timeline of like the more traditional facts about Shakespeare's life, like when he was born and when different plays were written and things like that. There was a map of London showing what London looked like at that time, which was awesome. There was sort of mind maps of different words and phrases that Shakespeare invented. He invented something like 2,000 words that didn't exist, or he was the first to write them down. They might have been words that people said, but he was the first to write them into literature, which is crazy. Like so many words that are so common to us now. This book was super interesting, super well done. It included everything I could possibly want to know, and it's just fantastic. So I highly recommend, if you are someone who loves Shakespeare, this is amazing and beautiful. So those are all of the books that I read this month. They were all non-fiction. I'm impressed also that I got to read 3 books by New Zealand authors this month. That's crazy. It was kind of unintentional, and I am just happy that I did that, because that was one of my goals at the start of this year, was to like read more books by New Zealand authors, and I've definitely done that, but this month was really good for that. Obviously they were all non-fiction as well because of Non-Fiction November, and that's fun for me because I don't read tons of non-fiction otherwise. I read a bit, but like it doesn't dominate what I read, that's for sure, so that was a nice change this month. And yeah, if you've read any of these, let me know your thoughts on them, or if any of them sound good to you, let me know that in the comments down below, and I will see you guys with another video in a couple days. Thanks for watching. Bye.